Hollywood's golden age gave the world unforgettable stars, faces that still glow on screens decades after their final performances. But what if, for some of them, the final curtain never truly fell? What if the studios where they created movie magic never really let them go? From cavernous soundstages and forgotten dressing rooms to shadowed hallways closed to the public after midnight, longtime studio employees have reported strange occurrences that refuse to fade with time. These are not campfire stories whispered on tourist buses. They are accounts from night security guards, veteran technicians, archivists, and crew members who spent decades working behind the scenes of Hollywood's most legendary studios. Some describe sudden drops in temperature that defy mechanical explanation. Others speak of disembodied voices, familiar laughter echoing through empty stages, or the unmistakable scent of a long-discontinued perfume drifting through locked rooms. In certain places, lights flicker when specific names are spoken aloud. In others, mirrors briefly reflect someone who should no longer be there. If a person devotes their entire life to the spotlight, do they ever truly learn how to leave it behind when the lights go out? Or are there stars whose bodies departed long ago, but whose presence remains bound to the spaces where fame once defined them? Tonight, we're exploring 8 icons from Hollywood's golden age whose stories didn't end with death. From a perfectionist who still seems to watch over his old soundstage to a symbol of youth frozen at the moment his future was cut short, these accounts suggest that fame doesn't simply disappear, it leaves an imprint. Whether these experiences point to something supernatural or to the lingering psychological weight of celebrity etched into physical space, one question remains impossible to ignore. When Hollywood makes you eternal, does it ever truly let you go? Clifton Webb was never the kind of star who blended into the background. With impeccable diction, a patrician presence, and wit sharpened like a blade, he became cinema's premier sophisticated snob, most memorably as Waldo Lydecker in Laura, a performance that earned him an Academy Award nomination. In life, Webb carried himself with a kind of controlled severity. He demanded precision, not just in acting but in everything around him: lighting, posture, costumes, and the invisible details most people never notice. And if that was how he lived, what happens to a personality like that when the cameras stop rolling? Does it simply vanish, or does it leave something behind? Since Webb's death in 1966, the former 20th Century Fox Studios, now part of the Walt Disney Studios, have accumulated a quiet catalog of strange events that longtime employees still discuss in careful voices. The stories don't begin with shadows or screams. They begin with something mundane: temperature. Webb, according to crew lore, always insisted on a very specific setting, and decades later, that preference seems to return with an almost stubborn consistency. Longtime studio electrician Raymond Martinez describes a pattern that became notorious among staff. A new occupant would request the thermostat be set to 72 degrees. Within an hour, it would drift back down to 65 degrees, exactly what Webb had demanded during his time there. Technicians would check the system, find nothing malfunctioning, reset it, and the same thing would happen again. If it was only a mechanical glitch, why did it keep landing on the same number, as if the building itself remembered what one particular man expected? Then came an incident that moved the conversation from odd to hard to ignore. Former studio archivist Margaret Wilson recalled giving a tour to film students in 2018 when the group stopped in Soundstage 14, an area connected to Laura. Wilson mentioned Webb and repeated one of his most famous lines: "I'm not kind, I'm vicious." At that exact moment, the overhead light directly above her crashed to the floor, missing her by inches. The fixture had been inspected the week before. Nothing appeared loose. No clear explanation followed. Coincidence timed with the mention of his words? Or the kind of coincidence that makes your skin tighten even when you're determined to stay rational? Night crews describe the most unsettling layer of all because it involves not systems, but presence. Multiple janitors have reported seeing a tall, slender man in 1,940 seconds attire standing in the doorway of Webb's former dressing room, watching them work with a critical expression. Night custodian James Dominguez put it bluntly: "The figure never speaks, he just looks at you like you missed a spot." The first time Dominguez saw him, he assumed it was an actor in costume. He apologized and said he'd come back later. And then, Dominguez says, the figure didn't walk away. He dissolved. If you saw that, if you watched a person-like shape simply fade out of the air, would you still be able to tell yourself it was nothing? Paranormal investigator Rebecca Summers, who has documented what she calls the Webb phenomena, argues that the unsettling part is not just the events, but how perfectly they match the man's personality. Unlike hauntings that feel random or fueled by tragedy, Webb's alleged presence seems to continue what defined him in life: watching, judging, maintaining standards. As Summers puts it, diva behavior doesn't die, it lingers. Some spirits, she suggests, appear confused after death. Not Webb. He seems to be doing exactly what he always did. Visitors to the Fox commissary have even reported hearing a disembodied voice delivering cutting remarks about modern fashion choices or poor posture events, sometimes accompanied by the distinct scent of Webb's signature cologne, Penhaligon's Blenheim bouquet. Whether you interpret these details as genuine anomalies, shared suggestion in a place saturated with history, or something more difficult to classify, they create a strangely consistent portrait. A perfectionist who may have never stopped monitoring the world he once controlled. And that raises the question at the heart of this story. If a studio can preserve a star's image on film forever, can it also preserve their presence and imprint of who they were, stubbornly refusing to fade to black? For millions of Americans in the 1,950 seconds, George Reeves wasn't simply an actor playing Superman. He was Superman. His portrayal of the Man of Steel on Adventures of Superman turned him into one of television's first true superstars, permanently fusing his identity with a character meant to be invincible. But Reeves's story didn't end in triumph. It ended abruptly and controversially, with a gunshot in 1959, an official ruling of that has been questioned ever since. And when a story ends without resolution, does it ever truly end at all? At Warner Brothers Studios, where much of Adventures of Superman was filmed, reports of strange activity have persisted for more than 6 decades. Retired security guard Vincent Delaney, who worked on the lot from 1978 to 2005, described Soundstage 5, the location used for many of the Daily Planet office scenes, as the most active area. Night guards routinely heard the sound of typewriter keys clacking in an otherwise empty building. When they stepped inside to investigate, the sound stopped, but they felt a sudden cold draft rush past them, as if someone had just moved through the room in a hurry. The reports didn't stop at sound. Reeves' former dressing room, repurposed many times over the years, developed a reputation among maintenance crews. Several workers refused to enter the room alone after repeatedly hearing a male voice state, firmly and without emotion, "I'm still here." That phrase has been captured on audio during at least 3 separate paranormal investigations, though the studio has never publicly acknowledged the recordings. If a voice insists on its presence long after the person is gone, is it memory echoing or something that refuses to accept its own ending? Paranormal researcher Dr. Eleanor Jenkins, who has studied the Reeves case extensively, believes the key lies in identity. The cape never left the studio. She says not in a literal sense, but symbolically. Reeves struggled with being typecast as Superman, a role that brought fame but also closed doors. For some employees, that struggle seems to manifest physically. Costume department staff have reported finding the Superman memorabilia storage disturbed, with the original cape removed from its preservation box and laid out as if ready to be worn, despite no evidence of forced entry or security breaches. The most unsettling reports occur on a specific date. Former guard Thomas Wilson recalled working the night shift on the 16th of June 2010, unaware at the time that it marked the anniversary of Reeves' death. At approximately 1 a.m., Wilson heard what he described as an unmistakable gunshot echoing from inside Soundstage 5. The sound was loud enough to prompt a full search and a call for backup. Nothing was found. No weapon, no damage, no sign of intrusion. Only later did Wilson learn that Reeves had died on the 16th of June 1959 at roughly the same hour. After that night, Wilson requested day shifts only. If coincidence can repeat itself with such precision, at what point does it stop feeling coincidental? Several witnesses have also described seeing a tall man in a suit, not the Superman costume, standing near the window of the old dressing room, looking outward as if waiting for someone who never arrives. The figure doesn't interact. He doesn't speak. He simply disappears when approached. Jenkins describes the overall impression not as threatening, but unresolved. It feels like someone caught between worlds, she explains, neither fully present nor fully gone. Whether these events point to something beyond explanation or reflect the psychological residue of a man trapped by his own legend, the pattern is difficult to dismiss. George Reeves played a hero who could leap tall buildings in a single bound. Yet in death, the stories suggest he may still be struggling with the one role he never escaped. And that leaves a final, uncomfortable question. When fame becomes a prison, does anyone ever truly walk free? Joan Crawford built her legend on discipline and force of will. From her early rise in Our Dancing Daughters to her late career triumph in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, Crawford approached every role with an intensity that bordered on obsession. She was known for arriving hours before call time, adjusting lights, rearranging sets, and shaping scenes as if the studio itself were an extension of her authority. And if control defined her life, what happens to that need when life ends? Many of the most persistent reports associated with Crawford Center on the former MGM backlot, now part of Sony Pictures Studios, where she filmed some of her most emotionally charged work. According to film historian Diana Winters, Crawford believed that environment was inseparable from performance. She didn't wait for the perfect setup, Winters explains. She created it. That belief appears to echo most strongly around stage 12, where key scenes from Mildred Pierce were filmed, the role that earned Crawford an Academy Award. Lighting technician Mark Jensen recalled working late one summer evening, preparing the stage for a shoot scheduled the next day. It was August in Los Angeles, the outside temperature hovering near 85 degrees, and the air conditioning wasn't even running. Without warning, the area along the east wall of stage 12 turned sharply cold. Jensen says he could see his breath. Thinking someone had opened a door, he called out only to realize he was completely alone. Later, he learned that the exact spot where the cold appeared corresponded to the location of Mildred Pierce's most emotionally volatile confrontation scene. If a space can absorb emotional intensity, what happens when that intensity is extreme? The pattern doesn't end on the soundstage. Makeup artists working in Crawford's former dressing room have repeatedly reported returning in the morning to find their carefully arranged stations reorganized, overnight brushes, compacts, and mirrors positioned in a precise order that longtime staff recognized as Crawford's personal preference. No signs of entry, no security alerts, just control quietly reasserting itself. If order keeps reappearing where no one claims responsibility, is it coincidence or habit refusing to disappear? One of the most striking incidents occurred in 2019 inside a post-production editing bay. Post-production supervisor Elaine Rodriguez recalled reviewing footage from Grand Hotel for a documentary project when all 6 monitors went black simultaneously. Seconds later, they powered back on each, displaying the same frame, a close-up of Joan Crawford's eyes. The editor hadn't selected that image. The system hadn't been instructed to pull it. Technicians were unable to replicate or explain what happened. Was it a glitch or something asserting its presence in the only language it ever knew, the camera? Night security staff have described another recurring experience tied to a nursery set built for the women, 1939. Guards reported hearing a woman's voice calling out the name Christina, Crawford's adopted daughter, whose relationship with her mother later became infamous. When guards entered the area, the voice stopped, but many described an overwhelming sense of anger and frustration lingering in the room. Paranormal researcher Dr. Raymond Pfizer suggests that extreme emotional conflict can leave a lasting imprint on physical locations. If unresolved emotion can attach itself to a place, how long does it take to fade? During a 2021 renovation of the original MGM backlot streets, construction workers reported tools being moved overnight in secured areas. In one incident, a 1,932nd-style wire coat hanger was found balanced carefully atop a stack of materials, an image impossible to separate from Crawford's cultural legacy. Security footage showed no one entering the area. Was it dark humor, born of coincidence, or a symbolic echo too precise to ignore? Whether these events reflect something beyond explanation or simply the residual force of an iron-willed personality, they share a common thread: order imposed, attention demanded, control reasserted. Joan Crawford was known for refusing to fade quietly, on screen or off. And that leaves a final question lingering in the empty soundstage. When a star's entire identity is built on command and discipline, does that control ever truly release its hold? Lucille Ball didn't just change television, she built it. Through I Love Lucy, she reshaped comedy, production, and the power structure of Hollywood itself. As a performer, she was fearless. As an executive, she was meticulous. When Ball and Desi Arnaz founded Desilu Productions, they created more than a studio. They created a working environment defined by precision, innovation, and relentless standards. And if that sense of responsibility defined her life, what happens to it after death? Most reports associated with Ball Center on the former Desilu Studios, now part of the Paramount lot, where I Love Lucy was filmed. Unlike other studio stories that carry heaviness or unease, accounts tied to Ball often feel strangely supportive, almost playful. Veteran sound engineer Thomas Martinez, who worked on the lot for more than 40 years, describes hearing unexplained female laughter during late-night sound mixes in Studios 41 and 43, the original Lucy soundstages. The laughter doesn't come from speakers or monitors. It sounds close personal, like someone standing just behind you, enjoying a private joke. Martinez says it has happened to him multiple times since the 1,990 seconds, often during moments of stress or frustration. That timing is a detail many employees find difficult to dismiss. Television director Sarah Johnson recalled a particularly chaotic production day in 2018. Equipment failures, cast conflicts, and a schedule collapsing by the hour. Alone in the control booth, trying to regroup, she distinctly heard a woman's voice say, "The show must go on, kid." There was no one there. Later, a longtime stagehand told her, without hesitation, "That's just Lucy. She shows up when things get rough." If encouragement arrives when it's most needed, is it coincidence or intention? There are also physical anomalies tied to Ball's former spaces. Staff working near Stage 21, where the Ricardos' fictional apartment once stood, report sudden cold spots forming in exact, recurring locations. Computers in Ball's former office have been known to power on by themselves, playing clips from I Love Lucy without any input. In one widely discussed incident in 2015, a monitor not connected to any playback system began running a full episode of the show before shutting off on its own. Technicians found no malfunction, no hidden source, no explanation. Some accounts involve sightings rather than sound. A camera operator working a sitcom taping in 2010 claimed to see a red-haired woman in 1,950 seconds clothing standing in the studio balcony, nodding approvingly at a well-executed comedy bit. When he pointed her out, she was gone, but several audience members had noticed her as well. The description matched Ball precisely. Was it shared suggestion or something briefly stepping into view? What separates these stories from others is their tone. There's no sense of anger, confusion, or distress. Instead, employees describe Ball's presence as purposeful. Television historian Dr. Eleanor Hughes suggests that if Ball does linger, it would align perfectly with her character. She fought for quality, fairness, and innovation throughout her life. Why would that stop simply because the work continued without her? Today, some Paramount productions quietly place a small vase of roses, Ball's favorite flower, in the corner of Studio 41 before a new show begins. Crew members say those days often run smoother, with fewer technical problems. Whether this ritual influences anything at all is impossible to prove, but it leaves one lingering question. When someone builds a creative empire from the ground up, do they ever truly step away from the stage they fought so hard to control? Few stars of Hollywood's golden age burned as intensely or as briefly as Montgomery Clift. With performances in From Here to Eternity, A Place in the Sun, and The Misfits, Clift helped redefine American acting. He brought vulnerability, psychological realism, and emotional exposure to male roles at a time when stoicism was the norm. But behind the acclaim was a man unraveling, struggling with addiction, trauma, and a profound sense of isolation. And if suffering defined his final years, can it truly end at death? The location most closely associated with Clift's lingering presence is room 928 of the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel, where he stayed for 3 months in 1953 while filming From Here to Eternity. According to former hotel manager James Wilson, room 928 has generated more paranormal reports than any other space in the building. Guests describe hearing pacing footsteps late at night, phones ringing with no one on the line, and personal belongings rearranged without explanation. Some guests check out in the middle of the night, often before learning anything about the room's history. Paranormal researchers believe the intensity of Clift's behavior while staying there may be key. Known for obsessive preparation, Clift reportedly rehearsed lines throughout the night and practiced trumpet playing for hours, leading to frequent noise complaints. Night manager Elizabeth Chen recalls security being called multiple times after guests in neighboring rooms reported hearing trumpet music, followed by what sounded like old audio recordings of dialogue from Here to Eternity. When staff investigated, no devices were found playing. The room was silent. If sound can linger long after its source is gone, what exactly is being replayed? Visual encounters deepen the unease. Multiple guests have reported seeing a slender man in 1,950 seconds clothing standing near the window, gazing out at Hollywood with an expression described as deeply sad. Others have awakened to find a man seated in the corner chair, watching silently before fading away when addressed. Tourist Michael Brennan, who stayed in the room in 2019 without knowing its history, described seeing a man in the chair at around 2 a.m. When he turned on the light, the figure vanished. The next morning, the front desk casually asked, "Did you meet Monty yet?" If strangers describe the same face without prior knowledge, how do you dismiss that as coincidence? Clift's presence is not confined to the Roosevelt. At the former MGM soundstages, now part of Sony Pictures Studios, crew members have reported sudden emotional shifts in specific areas. Set decorator Thomas Reynolds described a corner of Soundstage 15 where people inexplicably feel overwhelming sadness, sometimes to the point of tears. Later research revealed that the spot matched the filming location of a devastating scene in From Here to Eternity, where Clift's character learns of a close friend's death. Could emotional intensity imprint itself onto a space, affecting those who enter decades later? Similar reports have emerged at the Paramount lot, where portions of A Place in the Sun were filmed. Security guards have described seeing a disoriented man matching Clift's appearance wandering the backlot late at night. When approached, the figure vanishes, often accompanied by the faint smell of alcohol and painkillers, substances that haunted Clift's later life. Film historian Dr. Rebecca Martinez suggests that Clift's revolutionary openness on screen may be inseparable from the depth of his suffering. He exposed his inner torment to the camera. Perhaps that torment never fully dissipated. For staff who regularly encounter these phenomena, the dominant emotion is not fear but sorrow. Roosevelt housekeeping supervisor Gloria Mendez reports that guests in room 928 often hear crying in the bathroom just before dawn. Not scary crying, she explains. Heartbreaking crying, like someone in real pain. Clift's life was marked by brilliance and damage in equal measure. And that leaves a haunting question behind. If a man never found peace while he lived, why would we assume he found it after the cameras stopped rolling? Marilyn Monroe's death in 1962 at the age of 36 froze her in time. What followed was not an ending, but a transformation from living actress into eternal symbol. To the public, Marilyn was glamour, sensuality, and effortless allure. To those who worked alongside her, she was also fragile, searching, and deeply divided between the persona the world demanded and the woman behind it. And if that inner conflict never found resolution in life, could it truly disappear after death? The center of Monroe's reported presence is the former 20th Century Fox Studios, now part of the Walt Disney Studios, where she filmed some of her most iconic work, including Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and the 7-Year Itch. Employees consistently point to her old dressing room as the focal point of recurring experiences. According to longtime Fox staff member Richard Martinez, workers alone in the room sometimes glance away from the mirror and, when looking back, briefly see Monroe's reflection instead of their own. The image lasts only a second or two, long enough to register, not long enough to confirm. If a reflection appears where it shouldn't, is it memory playing tricks or something tied to identity itself? These mirror encounters are almost always described as quiet and melancholy rather than frightening. Witnesses say the reflection resembles Monroe as she appeared during her unfinished final film, Something's Got to Give. She doesn't speak. She simply looks at herself, as if caught between recognition and regret. And if mirrors represent the boundary between image and reality, what happens when someone spends a lifetime trapped between the two? Other manifestations rely less on sight and more on sensation. Costume maintenance workers have repeatedly reported sudden cold spots forming in areas where Monroe once prepared for scenes. These moments are often accompanied by the unmistakable scent of Chanel No. 5. The perfume Monroe famously wore. Elaine Wilson, who worked in costume maintenance for more than 30 years, recalls assuming a bottle had broken the first time it happened. Older employees corrected her. "That's just Marilyn saying hello," they told her. If a fragrance returns decades after its source is gone, what is it meant to recall the person, or the idea of her? The phenomenon isn't confined to Fox. At the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel, a mirror from Monroe's former suite is displayed in a lower-level corridor. Guests passing by have repeatedly reported seeing a blonde woman's reflection appear momentarily in the glass. So, many accounts have been filed that the hotel no longer attempts to explain them away, instead acknowledging the mirror as part of its official tour. When an object becomes inseparable from a legend, does it carry more than just history? Electrical disturbances form another pattern. Security guards and tour guides report lights flickering or dimming when Monroe's name is spoken aloud in certain areas. Thomas Johnson, a Fox security guard, claims the effect occurs often enough that guides sometimes demonstrate it intentionally. In rare cases, light bulbs have reportedly exploded in spaces associated with Monroe. Technicians have never identified a consistent mechanical cause. If language alone seems to trigger a reaction, what does that suggest about the power of a name? What distinguishes Monroe's reported presence from others is its emotional tone. Staff members don't describe fear, they describe loneliness. Former studio archivist Margaret Wilson notes that employees avoid walking past Monroe's old dressing room late at night, not because they're frightened, but because of an overwhelming wave of sadness. Some have reported hearing soft crying from inside when the room was locked and empty. The feeling, they say, is not threatening, just unbearably human. Psychologists studying celebrity culture suggest that Monroe's unresolved duality, Norma Jean versus Marilyn, may be central to these reports. Officially ruled a probable, her death left behind unanswered questions and persistent conspiracy theories. But beyond how she died lies a deeper question of identity. As Dr. Eleanor Hughes explains, Monroe spent her life divided between who she was and who she was expected to be. The mirrors, she suggests, symbolize that split. Whether these experiences reflect something paranormal or the lasting psychological imprint of one of the most scrutinized lives in history, they point to the same conclusion: Marilyn Monroe never belonged fully to herself. And that raises an uncomfortable question. If a person is never allowed to be whole in life, how could they ever truly rest after death? Long before modern celebrities spoke of privacy or paparazzi pressure, Rudolph Valentino experienced a level of fame Hollywood had never seen before. As the first great male sex symbol of cinema, the Italian-born star of The Chic and Blood and Sand inspired devotion so intense it bordered on hysteria. When Valentino died suddenly in 1926, at just 31 years old, the reaction was unprecedented. More than 100,000 mourners flooded the streets, riots broke out during his funeral, and Hollywood learned, perhaps for the first time, how dangerous mass adoration could become. And when a life ends under such overwhelming emotion, Does that energy ever truly dissipate? Valentino's reported presence is among the most persistent in Hollywood history, spanning nearly a century and multiple locations. The most frequent sightings occur at Paramount Studios, where Valentino filmed several of his most iconic roles. According to longtime Paramount security supervisor Vincent Rodriguez, employees have repeatedly described seeing a slender man in 1,920 seconds riding attire, complete with boots and jodhpurs, walking confidently through restricted hallways late at night. Rodriguez admits he was skeptical until his own encounter in 1998. While conducting a night patrol, Rodriguez saw a man in period costume turn a corner ahead of him. Assuming it was an actor who hadn't cleared the set, he called out that the lot was closed. When he reached the corner seconds later, the hallway was empty. There were no doors, no exits, and nowhere the man could have gone. If a figure appears solid enough to mistake for a living person, how quickly does certainty unravel when there's nowhere for that person to disappear to? Rodriguez's experience is echoed by dozens of Paramount employees over the decades. Witnesses describe a man in flowing desert robes reminiscent of the Sheik, or sometimes a dark cape, who vanishes around corners or seems to pass through solid walls. Paranormal investigator Dr. Samuel Pierce, who has documented Valentino-related cases for more than 30 years, notes the remarkable consistency of these descriptions, often given by people with little knowledge of Valentino's appearance. The sculpted features, intense eyes, and slicked-back hair match archival photographs with uncanny precision. If witnesses describe the same face without being prompted, where does that image come from? Valentino's presence is not limited to Paramount. His former Beverly Hills home, Falcon Lair, has been associated with unexplained footsteps, doors opening and closing on their own, and the sudden appearance of jasmine-scented cologne, Valentino's favorite fragrance. Residents over the years have reported these experiences independently, separated by decades. When reports repeat across time and ownership, how easily can they be dismissed as imagination? Perhaps the most famous site connected to Valentino is Hollywood Forever Cemetery, where he is buried. Visitors and staff have reported seeing a dark-clad figure standing near his crypt before fading away. The mystery of the Lady in Black, a woman who left roses at Valentino's grave for years, only deepened the legend. She claimed to have communicated with his presence, claims skeptics dismissed as theatrics, yet cemetery guides continue to document sightings, strange photographic anomalies, and electronic malfunctions near the crypt. In 2015, during an after-hours screening of The Sheik held as a tribute, multiple attendees reported seeing a shadowy figure near the grave. Security footage later revealed unexplained movement, though no physical person was present. The most recent documented encounter occurred in 2022, when a maintenance worker at Paramount reported seeing a man in vintage riding clothes who disappeared through a solid wall. Cameras malfunctioned during the incident and resumed normal operation afterward. For paranormal researchers, Valentino's case is notable not for shock, but for endurance. While many reported presences fade with time, Valentino's does not. Why would one of Hollywood's earliest stars remain its most consistent? Film historians suggest that Valentino died with unfinished business projects planned, personal relationships unresolved, and a career still accelerating. In paranormal theory, unresolved momentum can anchor a presence to place. But for those who encounter Valentino's likeness, the feeling is not threatening. It's like he's waiting, Rodriguez says, like he's still expecting someone to call action. And that leaves the central question of this story. If fame made Rudolph Valentino larger than life, did it also deny him a proper ending? When the world refuses to let go, does a performer ever truly leave the stage? James Dean never had time to become ordinary. In just 3 films, East of Eden, Rebel Without a Cause, and Giant, he defined a new kind of Hollywood masculinity, restless, vulnerable, and defiant. He wasn't polished. He wasn't settled. And that was precisely the point. When Dean died in a car crash in 1955, at just 24 years old, Hollywood lost not only a star, but a future that had barely begun. And when a life ends before it can resolve itself, does it ever truly leave the places where it was first imagined? Much of Dean's reported presence centers on Warner Brothers Studios, where Rebel Without a Cause was filmed. Crew members working night shifts have described unexplained activity on backlots long after production's wrapped. Lights flicker on empty streets, footsteps echo where no one is visible, and occasionally, witnesses describe seeing a young man standing alone beneath set lights, hands in his pockets, head slightly bowed, an image uncannily similar to Dean himself. Former Warner Brothers security personnel have spoken about recurring sightings near the original Rebel backlot streets. The figure is always described the same way: slim, youthful, dressed casually rather than in costume, as if waiting rather than performing. When approached, the figure disappears without sound or movement. If someone appears not to act, but to pause as if caught between moments, what does that suggest about why they're there? Other reports focus on emotional rather than visual disturbances. Studio employees describe sudden feelings of unease or melancholy in specific areas tied to Dean's work. Some say the sensation is strongest late at night, when the lot is quiet and the sets feel unfinished. Unlike other stories tied to anger or control, these experiences are marked by restlessness, a sense that something is unresolved. If a space can absorb emotion, can it also retain anticipation? Dean's legacy is inseparable from the idea of youth frozen in time. He never aged into compromise. He never outgrew rebellion. Film historians argue that this eternal incompleteness may be central to the reports surrounding him. Unlike stars whose identities solidified over decades, Dean's image remains perpetually in transition. He was always becoming something else, and then he was gone. If identity never finishes forming, where does it go? There are also accounts tied to Dean's connection with speed and risk. On certain nights, security guards have reported hearing the distant sound of an engine revving in areas where no vehicles are present. The sound fades as quickly as it appears, leaving behind only silence. Technicians have found no mechanical source. If sound can act as memory, what kind of memory lingers when a life ends in motion? What makes the reports surrounding Dean distinct is their lack of menace. No one describes fear. Instead, witnesses speak of recognition of seeing something familiar that shouldn't be there anymore. A presence not asserting itself, but simply existing. Waiting. Observing. As if the moment before action never arrived. Dean once said he wanted to live fast and die young, leaving a good-looking corpse. It was a flippant remark made long before it became prophecy. But in hindsight, it reveals something deeper. A life defined by momentum rather than destination. And that leads to a final question that lingers on the empty backlot. When someone never reaches the point of leaving, do they remain suspended forever, neither fully here nor truly gone? Across decades, across studios, and across lives cut short or lived too intensely, a pattern quietly emerges. These stories aren't bound by genre, personality, or even era. What connects them is something far more subtle, a refusal to fade. Each of these stars gave more than performances to Hollywood. They gave identity, control, youth, vulnerability. In return, Hollywood gave them immortality, but perhaps not closure. Whether it's a perfectionist still watching over a soundstage, a hero trapped in a role he never escaped, a woman divided between image and self, or a young man forever paused before his future could begin, the spaces they once occupied seem unwilling to forget them. Skeptics argue these experiences are coincidence, suggestion, or the psychological weight of history pressing down on familiar places. And that may be true. But coincidence becomes harder to dismiss when the details repeat, when names trigger reactions, when specific rooms carry the same sensations year after year, and when people with no knowledge of the past describe the same images, emotions, and impressions. Perhaps what lingers isn't a ghost in the traditional sense, but something more human, a residue of ambition, of longing, of unfinished identity. Hollywood is a machine built to preserve illusion, to replay moments endlessly, and when a life becomes inseparable from its image, maybe the separation between person and place never fully occurs. So the question isn't whether these stars still haunt Hollywood. The question is whether Hollywood ever learned how to let them go. If you were defined by the spotlight, by applause, expectation, and the gaze of millions, would you know how to leave when the lights finally dim? Or would a part of you remain behind, echoing softly through empty stages, waiting for one last cue that never comes?